Hi, everyone. My name's Katelyn Donnelly. I am the managing partner of Avalanche VC, an early venture firm that invests pre-seed and seed in companies that transform how people learn, earn, and own. This virtual learning series is brought to you by Avalanche and ECMC's Education Impact Fund. They are a $250 million evergreen fund that partners with companies improving post-secondary and career success outcomes for underserved learners in the U.S. And they're an absolute fantastic investment partner. We work together on many deals, and I'm excited to work with them again for this spring series. EIF has launched a Catalyst program, a 12-week program that helps EdTech and workforce companies refine product market fit and build repeatable sales strategies. They also provide up to $250K in funding, and the applications are open right now through June 15th, and they'll be evaluated on a rolling basis. Today, I'm really excited that on this sort of note of helping EdTech and workforce founders, we have a true expert who helps companies build sales processes. Welcome Matt Stinson, the Chief Revenue Officer at Starbridge, an Avalanche portfolio company. They are a GTM intelligence platform for businesses selling to governments and education. They help their partners leverage industry-specific buying signals such as RFPs and strategic plans. Before he joined Starbridge, he led sales at Parchment, which is one of the big success stories in the EdTech industry. He helped bring them at least to 100 million of ARR selling to K-12 school districts, higher ed, and state governments before they were acquired by Instructure. Today, we are going to talk about all things go-to-market, selling to education and government institutions, and how to build your sales team and get those first big hires. With that intro, Matt, we'd love to welcome you and let you take it from here. One more note is that we do want this to be very interactive. For those of you attending, put your questions in the chat and I will help Matt answer them. This is for you to help build your business.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Kaitlyn. It's really nice to spend a little bit of my afternoon with folks who are founders or early stage sales leaders at companies doing awesome stuff, trying to innovate in the public sector and drive better outcomes in education. I definitely want this to be pretty interactive. So I've got a general sense of directionally of where I want to cover. I'm thinking, when and how do I think about hiring my first sales hire? Once I bring a sales leader in, how do I think about performance management, success criteria, metrics, and motivation? How is managing sales talent different than managing engineering talent, for example? And then also, I think a big elephant in the room in every conversation I'm having right now with early stage founders and large enterprises as well is just, what impacts is artificial intelligence having in go-to-market motions? What role do SDRs and salespeople and sales leaders have? And what are the best tools on market to help us make use of this? And I'll certainly talk a little bit about that and try not to make that too much of a commercial for the company that I now run revenue at, as Kaitlyn mentioned, which is Starbridge. We really help take a bunch of insights around K-12 schools, higher ed, and help you figure out who is most likely to buy your service and give you tools to reach out to those folks at scale. But yeah, I guess, Kaitlyn, if it's cool with you, I can maybe start talking a little bit about the idea of like, when am I ready as a founder or early stage company to think about bringing on some sales talent? Who should that sales talent be? And how do I go about finding, vetting, and onboarding that person?
I think a lot of founders struggle with who are the first 5 hires. How do I move from founder-led sales to managing a team? And what are the big mistakes that you've seen people make?
Yeah, I think the number one mistake that I see a founder make, for context, aside from running revenue, running new sales at Parchment for about a decade, between coming here at Starbridge, I did some multi-client work in an advisory role. I've worked with probably about 15 ed tech companies over the last 2 or 3 years in this space. A lot of them early stage or founder-led sales. We're trying to bridge the gap from me doing all the selling to onboarding somebody. I'd say the number one mistake is that you hire someone who has a ton of experience in your sector, and the most recent position they're coming from is one of senior leadership at a big company. There's obviously exceptions to this general rule, but as you get more senior within an organization, your attachment to the day-to-day of actually selling gets less and less. And so if you're trying to say, hey, I'm going to bring in someone who has led a team and I'm going to hire this person and they're going to be my seller and then eventually scale and onboard new reps and really build out my go-to-market motion, I think it's really difficult to find somebody who is going to be really good at selling in an environment in a 0 to 1 startup where there's not a lot of process, there's no defined playbook, you maybe don't even have product market fit yet. And that person can then also scale the sales team as you do hit product market fit and you want to build out a sales process. So my guidance almost always is to first look for someone who is a very strong individual contributing talent. Let go of the idea that this person has to run the sales team 2 years from now or even 6 months from now. This is someone that's going to come in, hit the ground running, be a grinder. They're going to be able to work really hard. It takes anyone who's building anything in an early stage company, it's not a 40-hour-a-week job. So someone comfortable putting in a lot of time, someone comfortable in an environment where priorities are shifting all the time. Even at Starbridge, within the last 6 months of going to market, the ideal customer profile and who we're targeting has shifted quite a bit. That means you have to scrap old playbooks, old messaging houses, and old directions and be able to pivot. Some people love that and it's exciting. And then some people get really stressed and anxious in that environment. And I think you just need someone who wants to be there because they want to build this thing with you, right? So the more they can be tied to the mission and have some story that you believe and understand in an interview process of like why they want to help build this thing in particular, I think that's really important. By the way, at Starbridge, we actually broke this rule. Justin, who's our founder, hired me as a founding revenue role before product market fit. I did come from a big company where I was leading sales teams. An interesting example of who personifies this ideal is the rep on our team. We have 2, soon to be 3 full cycle reps at Starbridge. Our best high performing rep had reached out cold to us. They kept reaching out, including ultimately sending me a Loom video of a screen record of why they wanted to work at Starbridge, why their background was perfect. And I actually ignored it for several weeks, then got another video, right? I was like, finally, I have to give this person some FaceTime. And it's funny, she just closed an awesome, huge deal today. And I realized I never watched the video. I just saw the screenshot and was impressed that she did it. But in the video, she explains exactly, here's why I want to work here, right? This is why I want to build this thing. So the more that you can get people who really want to be on the bus with you at that stage is super important.
She had education or public sector experience before. Was that something you looked for in applicants? How important is that?
Yeah, she does. So she's basically spent a career in EdTech sales roles from very early stage to bigger, well-known companies. She knows what it's like. And for the people on the call, our buyer is generally a head of sales, head of RevOps, or head of marketing in an EdTech or GovTech company. So she knew what that was like. When you're in EdTech or GovTech, it's like I've had varying degrees of success hiring someone right out of administration or the classroom. If you are someone who you'll know within 30 minutes of talking to that person if they're going to have the chutzpah and the gumption and the grindiness to be successful in a sales role. I think in certain industries, it's really valuable. I think if you can find a badass teacher who's done 2 or 3 years of in the classroom, who's got good academic pedigree, who's smart, and is just burnt out, those people tend to be very strong in my experience. Selling is a way of teaching something. You're teaching them about your product, or you're teaching about how you're different than your competition. And so there's some real natural crossover in skills between someone who's been in the classroom for a couple of years and someone who's been a teacher. Where I've gotten burned in the past on this is at Parchment. I'm probably gonna get myself in trouble here, so hopefully this isn't distributed too widely. At Parchment, our buyer, or at least a key influencer, was in the higher ed realm, the registrar. Overwhelmingly so in terms of academic operations administrators, not the most tech savvy of people, right? These are generally people who are not like generally, it's changing now a little bit, but they weren't big strategic thinkers in the university either. And early on at Parchment, we made some hires of either some consultants or some full-time salespeople who did come from that role. And it did not translate very well into success because there's such a different energy. Registrar, not someone who's generally talking to a bunch of people all day. Classroom teacher is. So I think it really depends on who your buyer is and whether plucking someone right out of industry is a good bet. Early on in selling, deep situational fluency of your buyer is probably one of the most key things that you need to learn, whether you're a founder leading founder-led sales, or you're an early stage salesperson, like more so even than what is a good sales process, or how do we think about the onboarding life cycle? Like you just need to know what it's like to be the person who's doing the thing that your software or your tool helps with. So that there is this incredible jump start of that learning that happens when you come right out of the role. But I would just approach that with caution and make sure that there's good alignment around these kind of other softer skills around grittiness and gumption and energy and those things.
Have you had any experience hiring people? There used to be sales boot camps. There are some sales academies and stuff. Is that a good place to find hires or referral, or how do you find the right people?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think of some of the names of those. Some friends of mine actually started a company that ultimately didn't have much success in this, but I have a bias there. It's not a path that I've ever gone through. I think formal sales training can be a bit of a, there's, in my experience, no standardized process is the process that works for your company. And so there's very large consulting companies and training companies like Sandler and MedPick and Command the Message. As your company's bigger, they're going to come to your door and say, we should implement X sales methodology. And foundational skills are important, but like the belief that this is the way that like you get someone from discovery to proposal and proposal to close. I just find that actually the devil's in the details there. And in implementation, there's so much nuance based off of your specific target. And so sometimes, Kaitlyn, when someone comes with that very formal background, they're a little rigid and not as open to changing early on, especially early on in a company. Change is a constant. So I'm a little dubious of those kinds of programs, and I've never done that. I will say finding these people is hard in general. And I don't know, has anyone here read, I don't know if people can interact actually, so I'm not sure if it's worth asking, but there's a great book by Laszlo Bach. He was the head of people at Google, like throughout the 2010s. And the book's called Work Rules. And the book basically gives the playbook of HR, talent, recruiting, performance management through Google, through like some very good years for Google. They study what variables during the interview and vetting process are predictive of success once you got into Google. Can anyone guess which variable was the only one that had a high degree of significance predicting whether or not someone was successful? Collaboration, former athletes. Oh, interesting. I like that as a former athlete myself. Any other guesses? Ability to take feedback. It's nice. Shockingly enough, those are all things like collaboration, ability to take feedback. That's all things you'd get through a behavioral interview, right? You'd ask them questions, you maybe score them. Former athlete, that would show up on the resume, obviously, in their experience. So the only thing that was reliably predictive of success was whether or not a current Google employee had worked with that person and had said that person's a badass, we should hire them. So the only thing is internal referral. And so I look at that and I say, I think the whole behavioral interview is like a farce. Like in my experience, you sit down with somebody within a few minutes of their resume, you have all these biases operating. Like Mike Sandridge says, former athlete. I'm a former athlete. When I see former athlete, I can't deny it. A part of me gets excited that this person's going to have the same energy and attitude that I have. Then I spend the next 25 minutes of that interview either seeking to confirm or disaffirm my initial belief. You can add some objectivity into it, like we do at Starbridge, and we did this at Parchment as well. For each job, we define 3 to 4 characteristics that we want to screen for that we know or have a belief will be predictive of success. At Starbridge, those things are like, are you a grinder? Can you thrive without a lot of support or structure? 2, are you open to coaching and getting feedback? And 3, are you curious and do you demonstrate a high capacity of learning technology? Fluency with AI is certainly really important in selling Starbridge. And then we ask questions that get to each of those attributes. Then we score you on a 1 to 5. And then we seek to use that data to try to make an objective analysis. But at the end of the day, it's really you're just trying to confirm or disaffirm a belief that you have. So we rely heavily on internal references, just like Google. If someone else that I know at Starbridge, who's a talent, is saying that Kaitlyn's awesome, we should hire her, then that's hugely important to us. We also call references very early in the process. In my experience, references are the last step of an interview process. It's the final thing, and it's usually a rubber stamp. In our process, if I have an initial good screen with you, I want references right now. And I want at least two direct former managers or supervisors. And ideally, like the last two. Because in my experience, if those last two people don't say glowing things about you, I'm not going to be a better talent. I'm not like playing Moneyball here where I think I have some playbook of hacking it and finding like the best talent that no one has gone undiscovered. Like I want to find talent that someone else has said this person works really hard. They're very talented. And I always ask a series of questions on reference calls to try to force people to give me the real. If someone's providing a reference, there's already this bias that they're going to say something positive. So the questions that I always ask are, what capacity did you work with the person? So did you manage them? Were you a peer? What's the person's greatest attribute? And conversely, what's the thing that they needed to continue working on? And then most importantly, I ask everybody to rank on a 1 to 10 scale, where 10 is the most impressive elite people that you've ever worked with before. Where does this person fall on that map? And I only hire nines and tens. I'm not, if someone gets an 8, if someone gets a 7, they could have been great in other parts of the process. I'm only going to hire nines and tens, specifically for a first sales hire. If you can do some kind of contract-based work or temp to permanent, I think that's a great way to mutually de-risk the situation. If you think about it from your point of view, you're investing a ton of money and time in onboarding someone. It's a really important hire. The candidate is also taking a risk on a very early stage company that could be nothing. And maybe you're a psycho, or maybe they're a psycho, and you want to know that. So if you can define some sort of contracted way of saying, hey, it's 3 months, and then we can figure out a full term agreement, I think that's a wonderful way to do it. It's not always possible given people's needs and where they're at in their career, but I think that's a really nice way of testing into a good fit.
Do you find that you have more time in this economic environment to make hires? Like it felt 2 or 3 years ago, certainly during the pandemic, it was like, if I don't hire them, someone else is going to hire them away. Do you feel like the market dynamic gives you enough time to be really thoughtful and put those things in place, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, the market is undoubtedly softer than it was 2, 3 years ago, for sure. And I noticed that both in salary expectations are coming back to reality. There were some people who had COVID deals that were astronomical in total comp and equity and totally out of shape with market. And so that's coming back down, which is good, I think, for everyone to be in a sustainable model where businesses can make money and people can still make money. I definitely noticed that there's less urgency. I'm in less competitive situations. Now, the top candidates who are unemployed, which only usually happens because of choice, right? Because they decided to take a break or whatever it may be. Those people are super competitive. And
Mm.
several of the people I'm interviewing right now are in competitive offers, but it's not as cutthroat as it was, which is nice because then it allows you to do proper diligence. And I'm running a hiring process right now. So if anyone knows really talented AEs that you don't want to hire, but maybe I should, definitely would be open to chatting with them. A part of our process is a work at home project. I give access to Starbridge's platform and fluency with AI and prompting and business fluency of the people we sell to is really important. And so I give a mock scenario. You're selling a solution to a company that sells ACT and SAT test prep. Here's what Starbridge does. And I give very minimal coaching to see how self-startery people are. Go build out a workbook of that in Starbridge and then present that to us. And what I'm really trying to test there is just, can they think on their feet? Can they be creative? Do they know our business? And I think, Katelyn, to your point, 3 years ago, that kind of ask, maybe like some really qualified candidates would maybe even balk at it.
One of the questions from the chat is, can you talk about fractional CROs? Does it make sense to have a fractional leadership at an early stage?
Yes and no. My level of skepticism about sales boot camps and the trainings applies to a lot of people that are doing fractional CRO work. And I say that as someone who did a little bit of fractional CRO work. I know many people doing it. There are some people who are very good, who are staying on top of the evolving world of go to market. But especially now, if you are working for a client and executing every single day and like having to react and you're holding your feet to the fire of the results of what you're doing, is like a little bit different in a fractional role, unless you structure it in some kind of performance-based way. But a lot of those fractional CRO gigs are retainer-based. I certainly did retainer-based. If you aren't in an environment right now, given how much the playbook has changed in my mind's eye in the last 18 months, even in the last 6 months, you're just going to run a stale playbook. So if you've got someone who's been 5 years a fractional CRO, they're going to probably bring to you the playbook that they ran 5 years ago when they were an operator. And that playbook is completely ridiculous in today's day and age. My first gig in this world was as a founding SDR at Parchment. And the playbook that I ran then would literally net me 0 meetings today. That playbook was I'd get a list of data from Agile or MDR, pull all the registrar contacts and vice presidents of enrollment and associate superintendents, counselors. If everyone remembers, oh gosh, what was the mail merge in Microsoft Word, right? So I pull up Microsoft Word, I type up an email, I do a mail merge to an Excel file and send out an email through Outlook to like 500 people. And the email would just be like, hey, we're Parchment. We do this. Do you want to talk? And I would get meetings. If I sent that out today, I would probably get close to 0, if not 0 meetings. You need to have a point of view today. You need to do research on your accounts to figure out who's actually in market. What initiatives are they working towards? What challenges are they talking about? What other technology do they use that makes it sense for them to purchase my tool or service? That takes a lot of time, generally speaking, but in the last few months with AI, it is a lot easier to do that at scale. And I think that the go-to-market teams that are having a ton of success today, and this is certainly a little bit of a plug here for Starbridge, is you're able to take all of this data that's out there, board meeting minutes and strategic plans and budgets and organizational structures and competitive purchases, and you're able to figure out who's experiencing what. Let me run a very highly relevant, thoughtful email that's saying, like, hey, I noticed that you just launched a new program with the local community college on transfer pathways. Parchment's actually working with the school down the street. That email is the kind of email that gets a meeting booked today. And that email used to take 15 SDRs and a ton of hours of research. And now it takes an investment in a tool like Starbridge where you can do that at scale. VPs of sales who were leading 5 years ago, they don't even know about like signal-based outreach, or they're not in it. So I'm just like super skeptical, especially if that person hasn't been an operator. But of course, Kaitlyn and whoever asked the question, there are good people out there. My same vetting mechanism of talk to people that have worked with them is the number one thing that you could do here. And ask for a client list. Don't just have them put you in touch with former employers and former clients. Say, who are the last 5 people that you worked with? And you're going to get a more representative sample of what working with that fractional CRO can be. I certainly know some good ones and can put you in touch with people if that's the path that you want to go down, but I would just approach with caution.
I think on that note, to shift the conversation a little bit into compensation and incentives, how do you think about getting the right compensation for early sales hires? What have you seen actually drive sales? How do you balance base salary, commissions, and bonus to create fair, motivating structures?
I think early stage, you definitely want to be distributing a good amount of equity to ensure that the person's very excited about the thing that they're building. We generally, like very explicitly when making offers to candidates, we'll talk about like trading cash for equity at a premium on the equity. So if you drop down 5% in cash, we'll give you 15% more in equity. We want people who are very much aligned with the thing that we're building. Now, we're hiring largely in New York City. It is pretty expensive to live in New York City, so we need to have some reasonable amount of base. As a general rule, I like a 50-50 breakdown between a base and an on-target earnings. OTE is your base plus your variable, and I like that to be 2x my base. As a general rule, I make some exceptions for earlier stage employees who are taking on more risk, right? So if you don't have a true defined sales process, if you don't have repeatable revenue already happening, which by the way, I think you should before you hire someone, following the Paul Graham school of when to hire your first revenue client or employee, you should be able to be selling to strangers with some regularity before you outsource that. Don't think I shared that in the first portion, but I think that's like super important. If you're making an exception, you're not doing that, then I think it's reasonable that person who you're onboarding may ask for maybe a 70-30 split in terms of base to variable. but like to be really aligned on equity and or over index on equity and on variables so that they have a lot of skin in the game to perform. I think I've seen blow up with a first time sales hire in a founder led sales motion after transitioning from founder led sales was the founders have varying degrees of fluency with sales, right? It's like some founders I've worked with, very strong salespeople. They've maybe even been in revenue organizations before. A founder that I worked with was an academic, a PhD chemist. He hired his first sales rep and negotiated a 50-50 split, strong comp package. But when the business was facing a little bit of a headwind overall, he sat down with the sales rep and went line by line through each deal. The rep was supposed to make, let's say, I don't know, 15% on each of the deals. The CEO had gone through and said, I was involved in that deal, so you should make 8%. You weren't really involved in that deal much at all. You should make 4%. And this felt like normal behavior to the founder because he was treating the variable compensation like a management bonus. Salespeople don't think about their variable comp as some amorphous thing. It's super defined to them. If you change the rules mid-year in the middle of a comp plan, it can cause a massive shitstorm. And it did for this company. The reason why I was brought in to consult was because of the shitstorm that erupted in terms of culture, bad blood, and lack of trust. So there are certainly reasons to change your comp plan. You need to be like very proactive about that and delay the changes if possible. Ultimately, what we did was they paid the seller for everything that they owed them, and then ultimately came up with some kind of revised framework 2 months out that if the CEO is closing it without you, I'm not going to pay you on that. As a general rule, I'm not a fan of that kind of structure. Why would you want to disincentivize your salespeople from leveraging your best talent that's going to help you close deals? So just like a word of caution that salespeople treat their variable comp as almost part of their salary. It's a really important part of their structure, and don't F with that stuff. It'll get you in trouble.
That's fascinating. On that same vein, how do you handle, if you have a handful of individuals on your sales team, commission structures to maintain a one team mentality, but also reward people for their individual contributions, especially if you don't have the best territory data?
So is the question here, I'm dividing up the territories and I'm not exactly sure. I don't have enough historical data to know territory A is super high performing or primed to be high performing and territory B is we're not sure. Okay, and it's Allie. Oh, hey, Allie. Okay, awesome. Yeah, this is a hard one. It's actually a question that I'm in the midst of dealing with right now at Starbridge. It is reasonable to account for regional, especially in a market like higher ed or K-12 local politics, like who's using who down the street or the district over, is one of the most predictive elements of whether or not a future customer will buy. Really hard to sell your first customer in a state. Way easy to go from 15 to 20, right? As anyone who's scaled go to market in this market knows. I think it's super reasonable and fair to discount certain territories as growth territories and reduce the quota bearing component for that role and still keep the OTE on par, right? So in this scenario, maybe you're killing it in New York. One of Parchment's early competitors was dominant in New York, and we were always playing catch up. If you got Parchment in New York, it was not a great territory. That person might bear a quota of $500,000, but their OTE would still be $200,000. The person in Texas maybe had a quota of $800,000 and still had an on-target earnings of $200,000. So the impact of that is New York rep makes more per each deal than the Texas rep. Revenue in New York is worth more to the business because as you add accounts in a state, you're going to then more will come. I'm happy to pay premium for that revenue because I know it's going to lead to future revenue. And in a state where we're killing it already, I think it's reasonable to say that I'm going to pay less because that's an easier territory to farm in. Was that helpful, Allie?
Yes.
Be awesome if she was like, absolutely not.
One question in the chat is, do you have any advice for putting together commission only packages for part-time sales people?
I've experimented with it, and I don't think that I've cracked the playbook in a way that my advice is going to be any more valuable than you asking ChatGPT or Claude or someone else that
Hmm.
question. So rather than giving advice that's maybe not so useful, I'll just say, no, I don't think that I actually do.
What strategies or tools do you use to track and monitor sales performance without micromanaging?
Yeah. My philosophy on tracking metrics is I want to be pretty far removed from activity tracking. Talking about how many calls did you make or how many emails did you make, it's not helpful. It's boring. And like I'm adding no value over like an AI reminder to just be like, make more calls. It's not strategic. It's not fun. And as a leader, which I've done for many years in my career, it's just not a fun conversation to have. And it's not a fun conversation to be the recipient of either. But if people aren't performing on the lagging indicators of that activity, so they don't have meetings booked and their conversion is poor and their revenue is not, their bookings is down, then I do have to go there. So the way that I think about it is like this inversion of a pyramid. At the very most uninteresting but table stakes thing you have to do is activity. That's calls and emails, LinkedIn touches, letters that you're writing, things like that. Second thing is then meetings, right? That's like the atomic unit of sales. Is like a meeting is going to drive everything, all revenue and bookings. And then the final is close one business or booked business, however you're tracking revenue within your business. If someone is hitting the thing that I care about the most, I'm not going to go inspect the rest. I'm going to have an awareness of it and it's going to be in a dashboard. But if someone's having a ton of performance and they're not hitting the activity metric, I'm not going to say you need to do more. They're already exceeding what I'm asking them to do. They're doing it in a different way and they're having success. Who am I to say the way that I've conceived of this is the right way? Now, like super velocity, high velocity sales, like really small SMB in EdTech, if you're talking like a school motion or the smallest universities or colleges in the world, maybe that's just more table stakes because you really do know it's just like throughput and you just need to run rate some activity. But for most sales positions, like I don't think it's that important or useful to be tracking to that level. But in performance management issues, when someone isn't performing on the top of that funnel, the top of that pyramid that I care the most about, then yeah, we have to have that conversation. You do that in your CRM, right? Whether you've got HubSpot or Salesforce, if you're using Apollo or Outreach or SalesLoft or even just HubSpot for sequencing, and you're using the dialer, all of that stuff should just track automatically with very minimal need for the sales rep to actually update that stuff. That removes the excuses, which is good.
What steps should be taken when a sales rep consistently fails to meet their targets and goals? When do you know that it's probably time to part ways, or do you move them to a different role? How have you handled that?
Every single time in my career when a frontline manager who works for me comes to me and says, I don't know what to do about Susan, or I've been thinking, when should we fire? Like the decision's already made. If you are thinking about firing someone, in my experience, most of the time, you probably should be firing that person. Most people are kind, compassionate, and empathetic and don't love the idea of firing someone. So the fact that you've even moved yourself to ask the question aloud probably is pretty confirming that person is no longer performing and you need to get them out. The way that I usually approach this is the first thing I'll ask myself is, am I talking about this person when they are not in the room the same as I'm talking to them when they are in the room? Sometimes people will Slack me and say, ugh, Mark, he's really making a lot of sloppy mistakes and he is not coming prepared. I'll say, did you tell Mark that? And if the answer is no, then like you've got some work to do, right? Don't keep secrets. Does nobody any good to just have that internally and be like, I'm frustrated that Mark's not doing his job. You need to have that conversation and say, Mark, I don't think you're prepared as you could be. I think you're making sloppy mistakes right now. Like, what's going on? And then I usually, after that type of conversation, like that shaking the helmet, to borrow a sports analogy, within 2 to 4 weeks, you're going to know if they're making progress. If they're not making progress, I move the person out or move them into a different role. Plenty of people at Parchment could not cut it anymore as it got harder and harder to sell and hunt because we got so big and dominant. They weren't good at squeezing the final laggards right out of the market. And they would be good in an account management role. They knew the business, they knew the customers well, they knew everything about us well. So we moved a lot of people from hunting roles into account management roles. We were able to keep a person in the business, reduce all the costs of hiring and training. So you don't necessarily need to get them out of the organization. One of the biggest mistakes that founders and leaders make is sitting on someone that's really not performing, and you know it, and you just deal with it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen the gamut of that across my career. I think you're so right on the minute you're thinking about potentially firing someone, that is the answer. With 15 minutes left, I'd love to get to the question, which is always on everyone's mind, which is how's AI changed the game? How do you think about AI changing? What tools should people be using to manage their sales workforce? How do you stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I think a big term that's going around in general go-to-market circles, right? So I'm a member of a couple of CRO groups that are not EdTech specific. I follow a lot of great people on LinkedIn who are selling software or services horizontally to a bunch of industries. A general thing that's being discussed is like, how do you get alpha in your go-to-market? And alpha being like a financial term, like how do you create an advantage over everyone else in your space? And I think the way that you do that is I had top reps at Parchment spending 3 to 4 hours a day looking at strategic plans, board meeting notes, setting up Google alerts, like snooping around for little bits of tidbit that they could use to send a highly relevant email to somebody. And that process has always worked, but that process used to take away like an amount of time that made it impossible to scale across your organization unless you were able to onboard 10, 15 SDRs and invest a lot of human capital. The same thing actually goes for contact data in our market. The best way that at Parchment we found to get contact data, we did this at Blackboard as well, is we had people on Upwork and Fiverr who are overseas go out to the websites of all of the high priority districts, find their contact directory, and then update our CRM with the email. I have found that horizontal players like Zoom Info and higher ed or K-12 specific contact data providers, it's just super stale. And if you're burning money on lists that aren't updated, it's a super frustrating experience and very inefficient. So what I think you need to do is have some tool that is able to get you really up-to-date contact information, get you really up-to-date high intent alerts of what districts or universities are doing in your space, and use that list to inform your outreach strategy. Not what I did at Parchment 15 years ago, which was here are the 100 registrars in Texas, and I'm going to tell them that we're going to be in town for lunch, and I would get 15 meetings. Like what you need to have is some ability to say, I know what's going on at the University of Texas, San Antonio. I know that you're the right person to reach out to this, and like, here's the value that I can provide. And that's exactly what we do. And we get you the latest and greatest contact information by going directly to UTSA's website and pulling the current director of academic innovation or whoever you're selling to. I'll share a quick 3 minutes here of Starbridge, but open invitation to anybody. I'm sure they'll share my contact information afterwards if you're interested in any of the topics we talked about. The person who asked about fractional CROs, if you want a list of good people, I'm happy to help. But certainly if you want to play around with this tool, we do offer a trial motion. I'm happy to get you in touch with someone on my team or walk you through how it might be useful for your use case. I was just on a call prior to this with a member of the EIF fund. And what this company does is they help K-12 districts with standardized test prep improvements. So they have a curriculum and a process to increase ACT, SAT, and a couple of other standardized tests that are more localized, CLT and TSI. The use case we talked about is let me find anyone who's talking about this stuff over the last year and alert my team of it when it's happening. So basically what I'm looking at here is a list of all districts in the US, K-12 school districts, who are talking in their board meetings, in their strategic plans about an initiative or a pain about improving test prep for standardized tests. And the way that this is working for our customers is they'll come in, review this information, we'll tell you exactly what they're doing. They're transitioning from the PSAT to ACT, talking about what they're doing in grades 9 to 12. We'll tell you who you should be reaching out to on a one-off basis. Perhaps where it gets really magical is we're able to pull all this information into a custom play that you're going to be able to run on some regular cadence. What I'm looking at right here are 56 hits of districts that in the past 30 days have talked about improving standardized test scores. We're able to pull in data that you would need to put this into your CRM if you want. So we have an NCES ID, We have the URL. We can prioritize based off of the size of the institution if you're interested in, and then create a custom alert that's going to go into your sales rep or your inbox and tell you like, hey, this is what the high school improvement plan is targeting, a specific quote here that they're trying to increase the number of students who score ready or exceeding on the reading section of the ACT Aspire by 4%. Right. So now if you cold call, we're going to tell you who to cold call. Cameron Hill was the person who talked about this within that meeting. Here's Cameron's email address and phone number if we can get it. You can then say, hey, I saw that you guys just recently posted this and we're talking about a 4% improvement. That's the reason why I'm calling. When our customers do this kind of outreach versus the kind of outreach that I did at Parchment, which is one-to-many, very generic, they're seeing 30% book rates from cold outbound to someone agreeing to a meeting. Most of our customers in their old motion are seeing somewhere between 0.5 and 1.5 on that conversion rate. If you're looking to be more targeted in who you're reaching out to, if you don't want to miss out on all the districts or all the universities that are dealing and talking about the problems that you have or that you solve for right now, Starbridge is a great potential solution to take a look at. The other couple of things that we may help add some efficiency to with AI is we also track all RFPs in a market. You tell us what you're interested in tracking, and we're going to deliver to your email inbox every day the RFP. We can also score the RFP based off of the requirements that are useful for you. So if there's a certain set of questions that probably means it was baked for our competitor, we'll score that lower and not probably tell you to respond. But if you do want to respond, we actually then have an RFP writer where you can upload some of your previous RFPs. And within 5 to 10 minutes, we're going to create a first draft of that RFP, which is super helpful for smaller teams who don't have a dedicated person writing these things. And then lastly, we track competitive spend in the market by automating Freedom of Information Act or FOIA requests with our AI agents. We use AI to request the Imagine Learning contract at Torrance Unified School District that expires on July 30th. Our customers can click into this, see the contract details, and then run plays where they're going to reach out to everybody who has a expiration date for their competitors 3 months out, 6 months out, whatever it may be. And they're going to have full visibility into the pricing of their competitors, and they're going to be able to undercut them or make more compelling packaging than what is happening in the steady state. So that's my spiel on Starbridge. I'm super happy to open up a trial or give a demo more tailored to your business case if that's interesting. And also equally happily to talk shop on go-to-market and leading sales teams in case you haven't already understood. I'm very happy with helping others. Open invitation.
Thank you so much for your time with us here today, Matt. I mean, you're a true veteran of this space, and it's fantastic to see a tool like Starbridge that can help accelerate, especially small teams with great products to have impact in this market. How to contact you? Aren't you just Matt at starbridge.ai? Is that the email? Yeah.
That's my cell.
Oh, perfect. If anyone has any final questions for Matt, we have 5 minutes left. Avalanche and ECMC run this virtual learning series, and we'd love to get your feedback on this session. It helps us figure out how to serve you guys up some of the best experts in the space to accelerate your businesses. And our next event will be on customer success with Sarah Shea from Guild on May 29th. Anyone, any final? Oh, here's like a Q&A. Yes, we will share a recording on everyone who's been RSVP that's registered for this Zoom. You will receive an email from our Substack where we will share the recording and key takeaways.
Rewatching this would be a form of torture, I think.
There's AI tools for that. There's also AI scoring tools. You don't have to rewatch. You can just get your score.
We love that.
I like using it as well. So I think we'll just wrap up here. It seems like everyone's asked their questions, and again, just encourage everyone to reach out to Matt and learn more about Starbridge. And thanks for sharing your knowledge with us.
Love it. It was awesome to spend the time with y'all. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.